Hey guys, it's time to do some wiring. If you've been following along on my 51 Hudson build, I'm just to the point now of wiring for the engine transmission, and you'll have to forgive my voice. I've been sick, my eyes all red, I'm a mess right now, but work must go on, so if you can get past that stuff, we can get through this and we'll be good to go. So I wanted to go over this eBay/Amazon harness that I bought, tell you what I think, and I guess we're going to see if it works or not. Why did I buy an eBay harness? Well, mostly because of, I'd say, two major reasons. One was my deadline. I'm building this car on a deadline, and it's a huge time saver, if this works, to be able to just buy a harness, plug it in and go, rather than spend probably 2 days thinning out the factory harness. The other reason is the price. I mean, these things have come down to under $100. I mean, that's just insane. I mean, my time is worth more than that, and if this works for $100 to your door, I mean, that's pretty good. That's really good. Other reasons I wanted to get this harness is it was pretty much set up like I wanted mine to be, and that is with the PCM being inside the car. And for me to do that with a factory harness, I'd have to extend a ton of wires. If you've been following the build, I have my battery on the driver's side area, and I just didn't want to put the PCM right there, so I'd rather have it inside the car. So having purchased this harness, let me go over what it is. This is for P59, 2003, I'll say to 2006. These are listed to 2007, but it's only going to be 2007 Classic. 2007's like a half-year deal, where half was Gen 3 and half was Gen 4. So consider this a Gen 3 harness. If you have a newer body style 07 or a Gen 4 engine, this isn't going to work for you, even though they list it as up to 07. It is drive-by-wire. If I didn't say that already, this one is for a 4L60E. It already has the Multec connectors on it for the truck-style fuel injectors. It has a single MAF sensor plug with the 5 pins, so it's got the built-in IAT, just like the truck setup, which is what I want. Some of the other harnesses and some of the earlier harnesses I've seen have only EV1 connectors for the injectors, which won't work for this one, for my build. And they would have a 2-piece for the MAF, like an F-body. They'd have a single connector for the MAF sensor, and then a single connector for the IAT. I wanted it all built in like this to work with my truck MAF, because this is a truck engine. That's what I'm doing with it. So I bought this harness, and then I started looking online to find out if other people had used them or not. And I found a lot of videos either noting problems with these harnesses. I watched one video from a manufacturer basically trying to scare you into not buying one of these harnesses. I saw videos of people just saying they were flat out junk and throwing them in the garbage over items that maybe I didn't understand, but again, that's why it's important that you know exactly what you have and what you need to make your engine run. Some of the main things, and let me say this first too. All of the harnesses that I saw people talking about problems with were all the earlier style 99 to 02 red and blue, okay? I don't think I saw anybody with a blue-green P59 talking about problems. And again, some of these videos are a couple years old, so things may have changed by now. But all the problem harnesses that I saw talked about, at least as far as I can tell, were the earlier red and blue. So here's some of the, I guess, the common problems, I guess you could say, I saw noted about eBay harnesses. First one was tach signal. They said that the tach signal out of the PCM was tied to 12 volt positive. And that's not good, because you don't want to backfeed 12 volts to your PCM when it's supposed to be sending out a signal. So that could burn things up. So I checked this harness for that problem. It did not exist. The next problem that's commonly noted was the map sensor signal wire, which is the center pin wire on the map signal connector. Again, tied to 12 volts. If your harness has that, you will blow up your map sensor. Check this harness for that. Did not have that problem. Another problem noted was for the O2 sensors missing their low side reference ground. There's actually a ground pin. I can't remember the pin number, but there's a ground pin to the PCM that's a low side for the O2s, and on their harness there was not even a wire in that pin location. So they had to add it, tie it to the low reference. On the P59 harness like this, that pin is not used. So I just, bugged out all 4 pins on each O2 sensor, and they all were fine. In fact, I'll say that now. I bugged out every single pin on both of these connectors to their locations. Every wire was correct, and every pin was in their correct location. So I had no wires out of position. I had no wires in the wrong spots. Especially on things that could burn things up, you want to make sure things are right, like transmission. I bugged out every wire on this transmission plug to make sure it was correct. One other thing I saw noted, somebody had a problem with this. One of their injectors, or more of their injectors, had their trigger wires shorted to ground. That's really bad, because that means your injector is going to turn on full blast as soon as you hit the key on, and that's going to flood your engine, that's going to hydrolock it, that's going to bend a rod. So that will destroy your engine. I checked all my injectors. Like I said, I checked every wire. Every pin was correct for the injectors as far as triggers and their positive power side. The only wires on this harness I did not go and check every single pin was for the throttle body and the tach module, because I didn't think that was going to be as big a deal. If my throttle doesn't work, I'll bug those out. But since everything else worked out all right, I'm going to hope they're okay. Some problems noted with these harnesses that were brought up by, I'll say, the more expensive manufacturer was on their harness. There were no mounting bolts for the connectors to the PCM. This harness has them, so that's not an issue. One big thing they tried to scare you with was on the power feeds. Now, some of these earlier harnesses, these wires were black, which is kind of silly, because then you're going to assume they're grounds. They're not. They're 12 volts. So in this harness, they are red, which is good, and they're labeled fuse 1 and fuse 2. These should be fusible links. All right. That company was basically trying to scare you, saying that there's no fuse on these lines, and maybe there were not on that harness, because if these are not fused and they go to short to ground, they're going to burn up, and you don't want to burn your car down. These should be fusible links. As they're labeled fusible links, so hopefully they are. I have no way of testing them without shorting the ground, which I don't want to do. But so that looks like that issue has been resolved. One issue that does exist with these harnesses is there are no plugs in any of the open cavities where there's no wires. so moisture could get in there if you mounted this under the hood. If you're going to use this under the hood, I would use RTV on these and plug up these holes. Thing is, if you thin out your factory harness and you start pulling wires out, you're going to do the same thing. So you've got to RTV those if it's going to be under the hood. This is going to be on my car inside the interior and inside the car. So I'm going to leave it as is, because if you do RTV it, it may cause issues in the future if you're either removing wires or trying to change something. So I'm going to leave it as it is. So I think that covers it. I like this harness because it puts a PCM inside the car where I wanted it. It's got a good long length for the ALDL port, so I can put that under the dash anywhere. It's got the correct Multec injector connectors, no adapters needed. It's got the correct O2 connections for my Gen 3 O2 sensors, so that's good. It should do the job if everything is good. So far, everything I've ohmed out has been good. The only thing that was a surprise to me on this harness was the wiring for the TAC module is actually on the, I'd say the interior side of the harness, which I didn't plan on. Factory Silverado and the trucks, they put the TAC module outside in the engine compartment, so that's where I mounted mine. This has the wiring on the car side of the harness, so I'm going to have to feed that through the firewall to get to my TAC module. In the future, if I use one of these harnesses again, I'll just mount the TAC module under the dash, and that would solve that issue. So it's not really a problem. It's just something I wasn't totally prepared for. All right, so I think that covers the actual harness. The harness has connections for everything you need to run the car. There is no oil pressure sending unit connector, which is fine with me because you don't need that to run the engine. And I'm going to run mechanical gauge anyway, so I'm not concerned with that. All the other connectors look like factory style connectors and should work fine. This has a grommet on the harness, which does have a layer of tape on it here. If you remove that tape, this grommet can slide up and down this loom, and you can basically get that set up correctly to wherever you put your hole in your firewall. I'm planning on putting it as close to the rear of the engine as I can to try to keep it as clean as possible, but you have to deal with you know, the space limitations of what you have and where you can mount. But I like the fact that that's there, and that makes things easier as well. So before I get into some more stuff here, basically so far I can find nothing wrong with this harness. I had to make no modifications. All the wires were in the correct locations on both connectors. They all bugged out, ohmed out to their correct locations at the other ends. Nothing misplaced here. Nothing shorted to ground that shouldn't be. Nothing shorted to 12 volts that shouldn't be. So far, unless I've missed something, everything looks like it should work. Now let me give you some information that you might not have, and I don't think I've seen anybody give on any of the videos that I've watched. All right, so you have bought this harness, bought a harness, eBay harness. First, I'll just go over a couple things I forgot to mention before we get into that other stuff. To hook this up to the car, everything, obviously, all the sensor connectors are just going to plug where they plug. There are two 12-volt hotlines. Fuse 1 and Fuse 2, they're labeled. These go to the starter lug, where your battery cable goes, okay? That gets you hot power into your fuse box. There are two ground wires on this harness. One bigger one. Here's the smaller one. The bigger one is on the engine side. Here it is. Engine side of the harness. And that's going to go to the back of the cylinder head. Probably driver's side cylinder head, the way this is laid out. All right, so that's one ground. There is another ground. This one is on the interior side of the harness. This needs to go right to your dash, you know, somewhere metal. Again, if you heard me talk about grounds when I was building the car, Grounds are important. You should always have a ground from the battery to the engine block, from the engine block to your frame, from your frame to your body. And not just piddly little cables here either. I'm talking, you should have some decent size wire doing the ground. The ground from the body to the frame and the block to the frame, I usually use like a number 4, which is basically a small battery cable. It's heavy stuff, but all this current has to go through those grounds, and you don't want any issues. So if you've done that correctly, then you could ground this interior one anywhere inside the car to metal, and it should be fine. Good to go. All right, now let me get into the other stuff. All right, first thing I'm going to go over, my voice is shot, is the fuse box on this wiring harness. Let me move the phone and get you closer. I'm going to give you what all these fuses do, because that information doesn't come with the harness. All right, so this is the fuse box that comes with this harness. All right, we've got 2 relays, ignition relay, fuel pump relay, and then 8 fuses along the bottom. Okay? This wire here is the 12-volt feed into this ignition relay. All right, so this wire has to be 12 volts during key on and during cranking. All right, so this side here is going to be our ignition relay. We have, you see the heavier wires here. These are the power in and the power out, and they're going to be controlled by a coil. And when that coil activates, it closes a set of points and sends power from one side to the other and out to the device. So as this comes from your this wire here, this is the trigger wire for the ignition coil. This needs to have power 12 volts on, and 12 volt key cranking, okay? A lot of people have problems with their cars not starting after a swap because they don't have power with the car cranking. Gotta be. If you have a car that had an HEI ignition or even a points distributor, you can use that wire to send power to this. Now, the thing is with that is if it is an older car that used points, make sure it's not a resistance wire. GM used a resistance wire and not a straight wire to feed the coil. If you had an engine with an HEI on it, 74 or newer, 75 or newer GM, that's a regular 12 volt wire. If you did have a resistance wire on an older GM, you got to pull it out from the bulkhead, replace it with a regular wire, and be good. But check it with a test light. Make sure you got 12 volts in on this key on and cranking, and then this relay will work. This relay is going to send 12 volts to the first 6 fuses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? Not these 2. These 2 fuses have 12 volts on them, fed direct hot from, on my harness, it's the red wire fuse number 1 that goes down to your starter lug, okay? So these 2 are going to have hot on them power whether the car is turned on or turned off. And I'm going to go over all these fuses and what they go to, and you'll see why. All right? So, on my harness, at least, and I suggest you verify because I don't know what the quality control is on these things, but for the amount of harnesses that they're pumping out, for the low price that these are, it's worth spending some time to verify things so you don't destroy your engine or burn your car up. It's a good idea to do that. So let's go over the fuses. So the fuses, left to right. I'm going to say 1 through 8, left to right. Fuse number 1, that is injectors 1, 3, 5, 7, and the coils for 1, 3, 5, and 7. So that's the driver's side bank 1. Fuse number 2, injectors 2, 4, 6, 8, and the coils for those cylinders, 2, 4, 6, 8. So that's the passenger side bank. Fuse number 3, this is for your MAF sensor, MAF, mass airflow sensor, and both of your oxygen sensors, all right? Fuse number 4, that's going to be for your transmission. Fuse number 5, that goes to your TAC module. Fuse number 6, this is to the PCM, so that's key on and cranking power to the PCM. Fuse 7, this goes to your ALDL port under the dash. All right, so that's so you can connect with the key off, and it should have power there. You probably wouldn't be able to read anything because with PCM off, I don't know if you could actually read any data. But anyway, that goes to your ALDL port. And fuse number 8 goes to the PCM. So that's going to be 12 volts all the time to the PCM, most likely for memory. All right. Next, let's go over the bundle of wires that goes under the dash. All right. I don't think I've seen this mentioned so much on any of the videos I've seen, but get these twisted up. Here's the this is the bundle of wires that they give you under the dash, and hopefully your colors are the same, but let's go over them. Now, the first thing I noticed on this harness was all but 2 of them are pre-stripped, so they all have exposed wire on them except for these 2. And the reason for that is these 2 are F-body only. These you're not going to need. This is a gray wire and a light tan wire, and those are F-body only for oil pressure and water temperature. And as far as I know, they go nowhere. They're probably in the harness and just snipped off. They are not used in this application, so I'm not even going to worry about them. Now, the rest of the wires. White wire. That's your TAC signal. So you hook that to your tachometer signal input. Black wire. That's your vehicle speed sensor. That's going to be your input for your electric speedometer. Green wire. This is going to be the trigger for fan number 1. So if you have enabled electric fans, this is going to go low to ground. If you have, like I said, enabled electric fans and you have a temperature set point, say whatever, 190, 195, when this goes low, that'll trigger the relay to turn on fan number 1, which of course you have to wire up yourself. The blue wire, fan number 2, same thing. This will go low at a preset temperature that you put in. If you enabled electric fans, this would control fan number 2. Now, you could always have these both turn on at the same time. Doesn't matter. I've done it that way. I've done it 1 and 2. I built cars where I only had 1 electric fan because there was no room for 2, and I only used the fan 1 input. Doesn't matter. So you can do that with that. Okay, next we have, I'm going to save these 2 separately. The brown wire. This is going to be for the service engine soon light. This will go to ground when you throw a code, okay? So if you wire up a light bulb or an LED with a resistor, you're going to feed 12 volts to that light on one side, and this is going to go to the ground side. If you throw a code, this will go low, turn on the light. Orange wire. This is park and neutral input to the PCM. This is not neutral safety switch. What this is it just lets the computer know that you have the car in park or neutral, and I believe it bumps the idle up a little bit when you do that. Is this necessarily needed? No. I have built cars and used the original steering column, which an example is a 1941 Cadillac I built, and I used the original steering column, which has no provision for a park neutral switch because it was originally a 3-speed manual car, plus there were no reverse lights on the car. So there was no switch on the car to tell it if it was in park or neutral. I didn't use this. The only thing it did was when you went into park or neutral, the idle didn't come up, I guess to prevent a stall. But it was fine. It worked just fine. All right, now the last 2 wires, the purple and the yellow. These are both going to go to your brake switch, but they're going to be different, okay? The purple wire, this is for the TCC, for your torque converter lockup. This needs to have 12 volts with the brakes not applied, okay? So when you step on the brakes, you should lose the 12 volts on this wire to unlock the lockup converter. Now the yellow wire works just the opposite. This should have no power on it when you have no brakes on. So when you step on the brakes with this one, it should get 12 volts. So the purple wire, when you step on the brakes, should go to 0 volts from 12. And the yellow wire should go from 0 to 12 volts when you step on the brakes. Now this yellow wire runs up to the TAC module connector, okay? So I have a feeling this is for cruise control. I don't know if this is really necessary unless you're running cruise. I guess I'll figure it out because I don't know if I'm going to hook it up or not. I may. When I wire this harness into the car, I will go over how I connect both of these and some options you can do depending on how your car is set up to make these work. All right. I don't know if I'll be using the electric fans. Right now I have the mechanical fan still on the engine, and if it clears, I'm probably going to run it. If it doesn't work, then I'll be going into electrics and we'll deal with wiring electric fans. Okay, so we've covered fuses, we've covered the wire bundle under the dash. I think the last thing to cover here will be the relays. Now this is looking from the back, and let me get this so we can get a good view on it. So over here is going to be the ignition side relay, and this side is going to be the fuel pump relay. All right. Why do we use relays? Well, relays are nothing but a switch, and what's nice about a relay is a high current switch. Okay, these relays can hold high current, 20, 30, 40 amps, depending how they're rated, even higher sometimes. Whereas your common toggle switch is not rated to handle that much current. So with a relay, you can use low current to control high current. All right. So you can use very small wires, like this is the fuel pump relay. These are very small wires, and these are going to be used to control a high load, like the fuel pump. And we'll go over why these wires are missing in a minute. Now, the fuel pump relay on these harnesses, and I think it's the same on every eBay harness, I don't know why, but we need to put 12 volts on this pin here of the relay. All right, I'm probably just going to open this harness up a little bit and steal it from the 12 volt feed for this relay and put it over here. I got to look, I got to see what's what here. And then this side here, this is going to be out to our fuel pump, and that's going to be a heavier 10 gauge wire, again, with a connector. Now, these cheaper harnesses do not come with the connectors to put into the fuse box. You got to buy them. Found these on Amazon, 6.3 millimeter crimp connectors, and notice they have lock tabs on them. You got to have that lock tab, otherwise the connector will not stay locked into the plastic. It'll just pull in and out. So I'm going to put one of these on a wire and see if it works. All right, the Amazon connectors did work. 10 gauge is a little big for them, but I got it in there. So, crimping tool, and she's on there. So now with that lock, see there in the back of the connector. And again, these are 6.3 millimeter connectors. That will snap into the back of the fuse block. I just did this one here, and now it's solid in there. So that is it for, I think, the overview of the harness. If there's any questions, throw them in the comments. I'll answer everything I can. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. One thing I did notice that I forgot about, oh no, it is there. I didn't think these had a gasket to hold to the PCM. They do. Nice. Okay. Okay. I have no complaints. My only thing with this is that if you're going to buy an eBay harness, be prepared to spend some time to trace signals. I would bug out every single wire, and if you have one of the red and blue harnesses, I would really pay special attention to those known issues that I listed in the beginning of the video. Take some time. And, you know, there's no there's no shame to not understanding electronics. And this isn't even electronics. This is just signals. If you're not comfortable tracing out wires or troubleshooting a harness, there's nothing wrong with buying a harness from one of the more expensive providers. They're going to be, I would say, much more guaranteed to be plug and play. Plus, you're going to get support. You're not going to get any support with these harnesses. The places you're buying them from know nothing about them. They don't know anything. So if you're not comfortable with tracing signals or troubleshooting, there's nothing wrong with spending the money and getting a harness from one of the well-known, more expensive providers. It's money well spent if it gets you on the road without any questions and not worrying about it. All right, hope that helped out some people. Next video will be installing this harness on the engine, wiring in the harness bundle under the dash, fuel pump wiring, and hopefully starting the 51 Hudson and getting this thing moving along. Thanks for watching. See ya.